Like most Canadians, I was horrified by the sights of angry mobs of people intimidating hospital workers and patients outside of hospital, screaming abuse at parents and children outside of vaccination clinics. But I also worry about unintended consequences. And when I look at this bill, I am concerned about the prospect of, imagine a provincial government misusing this bill against strikers, especially healthcare workers, outside of a hospital during a strike where emotions are running high. With your background in the labor movement, I wonder what assurances you can offer me and Canadians that there are going to be sufficient safeguards that this legislation is not misused to affect the right to strike and the right of strikers to protest outside of health facilities.
Senator Yussuff.
Thank you very kindly, Senator, for your question. As you know, when the Minister of Justice did come to the Legal Committee, this question was asked of him. On the record, he states very clearly, of course, this is not the objective of the legislation. Those fundamental rights are protected. As a former leader of the Canadian Labour Congress who spent a lot of time on picket lines and protests, I understand fundamentally what those rights are all about. I think they're safeguarded, but of course we still have an independent judiciary in this country. Should any provincial jurisdiction overstep, of course, the limitations that is in this legislation, I think we have our course to, of course, restore those imbalances should they happen in the country. But I'm very much, of course, conscious of this fact. That's why I did ask the Minister the question when he came before the Justice Committee.
Senator White, I was the senator that you quoted who asked the minister the question about intimidation at the homes of healthcare workers. And so this is absolutely a concern that I share. But it was your argument today, and I believe the argument of other senators at committee, that in fact we didn't need much of this legislation because it was already encompassed in existing criminal code provisions. Drawing on your own experience as a former police chief and police officer, do we actually need your amendment, or are health workers sufficiently provided under the criminal code as we have it now?
Senator White.
Thank you very much for the question, Senator. My perspective is that I don't necessarily believe the legislation is going to improve upon the tools the police need. But if we're going to go there and say the role of healthcare workers and public health officials is so important that we will take care of you in a better and different way, then we ought to protect them from the intimidation we have seen them receive in their homes. So I guess at the end of the day, I'm not sure it'll help. But if we think it will help, then we should actually go as far as we can.
Would the
Senator Simons
take another question?
Always.
Because this comes to the crux of how I'm going to vote on this amendment, because I come from Alberta, where health workers have absolutely been intimidated in their homes, where they've received death threats, where it's been really, really disturbing and terrifying attacks, not just on those healthcare workers, but on our social fabric. And yet, at the same time, many of my legal colleagues and my policing colleagues are telling me that we don't need this change at all. So, I mean, if it's just a question of belts and braces, what is the impetus that we would need to vote for this amendment if you don't, in fact, think it's going to do anything?
Senator White.
Thank you, Senator. In fact, the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee has raised in the past the overlapping of criminal offences, that we need to stop building on the criminal code and start building a new criminal code. So that's been raised previously by the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. I guess I'm always back to the same thing. If we believe that this will help, so if you would vote for this legislation, then the amendment will make it better. So, and my perspective is, and I will vote for this legislation, as much as I'm concerned about the limited amount of time, if any, that we actually gave to make it better legislation, like some immediate responses. But I think if we are concerned enough to say that the legislation is important, then the amendment will make it a better piece of legislation and protect healthcare workers and send a message, which I think the minister is trying to do, to those people, that not to show up at someone's house, that you will be arrested, that you will be dragged off because it is that serious. So I guess I'm always back to the same point. I almost feel like this discussion should have taken place in committee, whether it's necessary, but it isn't. Instead, it's taking place here in third reading.